Well, why don't we begin? Let me welcome everybody to this week's Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the forum's creator, host, cat herder, and I'm really glad to see you all here for talking about a very, very important subject for higher education and its future. But before we proceed, let me introduce the program. Let me explain where it came from, how it works, and how it's supported. Then I'll introduce this week's guest. Now, you should know the forum is a discussion-based platform. What I'm doing for the next minute here of just showing you slides, we're going to stop that. This is going to be entirely about face-to-face conversation between people interested in the topic. Now, this spun out of a non-face-to-face based discussion topic, a project called the Future Trends in Technology and Education Report. If you haven't seen that, the FTTE report is a monthly trends analysis that looks at the major trends reshaping higher education. It covers a wide range of ground from sociology to economics to technology to enrollment. If you haven't seen it before, just go to ftte.us. You can download a few sample issues or subscribe. Now, the FTTE report and this Future Trends Forum are combined in a larger project called the Future of Education Observatory. If you haven't seen that, it's an ongoing, continuous, multimedia, multimodal, participatory attempt to grapple with the future of higher education. So this includes the forum, it includes the FTT report, it includes a blog, it includes a book club, even a bookstore. So check out futureofeducation.us to learn more. Now, we can only do this kind of work with the help of some generous sponsors who I'd like to recognize before we proceed. To begin with, we're really grateful to NYSERNet in New York State. That's a not-for-profit that helps that state's colleges and universities do great stuff online. We really appreciate the professional development work, their research, and we really, really appreciate their support. We're also grateful to Shindig because, as you can tell, Shindig makes available the technology that we're using right now. So if you haven't seen this before, let me just walk you through it. Where I am right now, and where this slide is just for a moment, is called the stage. And it's called that because everybody can see and hear everything that goes on up here. Now, right below us, if you look around, you'll see a bunch of different people, each represented by either a silhouette or a picture or a video feed. And those are participants from all over the place, from around the world, and each of them usually represents one or a couple of people from a single sign-in. And as you'll see as we go, that representation of people will move back and forth as people get comfortable and as they talk with each other. Now, below that, you'll see a white strip on the screen, and that contains three powerful tools for being able to communicate during this hour. And let me just walk you through these. On the left edge of that white strip, you'll see a number. It's the number 7 with a few different heads. And if you click that, up will pop two different windows. The one on the left will be a kind of film strip representation of everybody who's in the space with you. So you can mouse over different people and figure that, who Rick Crane is, or Daniel Stanford, or Julie Meyer. And that's a pretty useful way of getting a glimpse of the room. And to the right of that is a discussion box. That's a little place where you can chat with other people. In fact, you can chat with roughly 20 or so people at a time. And we found that's a good place for people to share quick thoughts, observations, to share links to articles and resources that come up. And people are often very informal. In fact, if you haven't used it already, take a minute just to introduce yourself. Just say who you are and where you are today. Now, back to that white strip, there are two more powerful buttons, two more powerful interaction features. So next to the number with heads on it, you'll see a raised hand. You'll see a question mark with a circle around it. If you click on that, up will pop a little box that'll let you type in a text statement. So that could be a question or a comment. And you can enter that if you'd like to share a comment or a question with the entire crowd. And what happens is when the time is right, I'll flash that on the screen so everyone can see it, and then I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear it. Now, if your microphone is working, if your camera is working, if you're in a place where you can talk out loud, then go back to that white strip and go to that little button with a hand on it. That hand tells us that you want to join us here for video. So if all those conditions are met and you'd like to join us, press that button and we'll beam you up here on stage. In fact, right now we can hold up to 4 different people here at a time. So you can have me, this week's guest, and then 2 of you. Consider it a kind of pop-up DIY panel. And if that sounds complicated, it's easier to do than it was that I described. It's actually very, very friendly. And we'll see how it goes as we advance. So video, text chat, Those are three different ways to participate. And if that's not enough, head over to Twitter and just use the hashtag FTTE. And you can see people will sometimes comment who either can't make it in, maybe they're on a low bandwidth environment, or they're in here and they want to share what's going on with the rest of the world. So we've already had some different people who've been sharing some really good thoughts and some questions. So those are all ways to participate, ways to share your thoughts, to push back, to ask questions for clarification. Please take advantage of them as you feel comfortable. And we're really grateful to Shindig for making available that technology. Now, also, we're really grateful to our supporters on Patreon. And let me just show you how this works. Patreon is a crowdfunding site like Kickstarter or GoFundMe. It's a way for people to collaboratively support an ongoing project. In this case, it's our project of exploring the future of education and technology. People contribute as little as $1 a month to make sure that everything is running fine. And some people contribute more, including folks like Michael Haggins, Chris Lott, Bob Johnson, Matthew Henry, Corey S., Robin DeVries, all kinds of Laura Armour. We're really grateful to them for their help. And you can join them. Just head to patreon.com/Brian Alexander and join more than 100 people already supporting us. So that's who supports the forum. That's how the technology works. That's where it came from. Now, I'd really like to introduce this week's guest. We have been talking about mental health in higher education. We have not yet explored it in great detail. So what I'm really, really pleased to do right now is introduce you to Lee Keys. Until just, I think, a month ago, Lee was the executive director of the Counseling Center at the University of Alabama. A long, long career in student mental health. And he has a new book out on delivering college mental health. About a month ago or so, Lee retired from that position and is now starting up a relaxed retirement that seems to involve writing, consulting, teaching, and doing 1,000 other things at once. Lee, let me welcome you to the forum. I'm really glad you could make it.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Now, I have to ask, this is always a question that you ask about people living in the South starting a certain time of the year. Just how hot is it there now?
I think we're supposed to hit 85 today, 90 later in the week.
Not bad for June, or May, rather. Right. Well, stay as cool as you can.
That's my plan.
Friends, I have all kinds of questions to ask our guest. And I'm going to start off with a couple. But as we go, and more importantly, as he answers, I'd like to hear your thoughts and what you would like to ask, so I can just get out of the way and be your MC. So as we go, remember those different options for participation, the raised hand button, the circle, the question mark button, or Twitter, and we'd love to hear it. But to get things rolling, let me just ask, now that you're starting this bold new phase in your life, what lies ahead of you for the next year? You're going to be doing a mix of writing, consulting, and teaching classes, or what?
Right. Well, I'm working on carrying out the things that I've written about in the book. And some of that will be done through writing, and some of it will be done through teaching, and some of it will be done through moving forward on the Comprehensive Counseling Center movement, which several other directors and I have been involved in. I'm very interested in leaving things that we've learned behind for other counseling center personnel and administrators on campuses as well.
Can you, for those who aren't familiar with it, can you say a few words about the Comprehensive Counseling Center movement and what it entails?
Sure. The Comprehensive Counseling Center refers to a model of counseling services. Four directors, including myself, co-authored a paper which you can find in the Journal of College Student Psychotherapy 2017. It refers to a model of counseling services. In my book, I write about models of counseling services, and it's one of them. And it's something I happen to believe in pretty strongly.
And this has the advantage of being centralized rather than just...
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. This has the advantage of being centralized rather than distributed.
I'm not clear on what you mean.
Sorry, of having all mental health support for students located in one physical location rather than being distributed over a campus or over a community.
Well, actually, the model just refers to the way the center itself is modeled or organized. But I also happen to believe that helping students should happen across campus through the entire community. Because
I see.
counseling centers, there is no way that a counseling center can address the total mental health need, and that's true of any community, regardless of where you are.
Hmm. Oh, thank you. That helps clarify it then. Then let's turn back to your book. Congratulations on its publication. I'm really glad that it can share the experience and knowledge that you've won through these years of work. Let me ask a couple of things about it. First, what were some of the surprises that you encountered in assembling it and writing it up? Were there any discoveries that seemed really counterintuitive or unusual?
Well, I suppose I would say that the main surprises were that the things that I had been experiencing and suspecting for a long, long time
Mhm.
were supported in the literature, or in some cases, the lack of literature that I found as I was researching the book. This is especially true in two main areas.
Yes.
One having to do with how little information there is about building a counseling service from scratch. I'm not talking about uh, enhancing an existing counseling service. I'm talking about building it from the ground up. How do you build a healing community in a college environment? And how
Hmm.
do you build a counseling center? So there are
Hmm.
things that I learned about that I wrote about in the book. The second area really has to do with the popular orientations toward young adults and college students today, things you read
Uh-huh.
about in the press,
Uh-huh.
uh, and also you read about it in some professional literature as well, that just did not square with my experience of young people. Uh,
What are some examples of that?
well, I think everybody is aware of some of the common lingo that's thrown around about young people. That they're entitled, slackers, lazy,
Snowflakes.
manipulative, entitled snowflakes. Yes, that's a common one. And I'm going to tell you, none of that matches my experience. Now,
Hmm.
did I see those behaviors? Yes, I
Mhm.
did. But that is not, in my opinion, the essence of what's going on for students. It's a very superficial
Hmm.
take on young people.
Well, if you want to correct that a popular account, how would you correct it? Would you say that students are far more resilient than they're being portrayed as?
I think they are more resilient, creative, less burdened by rigidities that older generations have,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
things that our culture has struggled with for a long time. They've begun to throw off some of those restrictions and boundaries, and I think in a good and healthy way. There's a lot more strength to them than what meets the eye.
Hmm.
Now, young people develop, all young people develop. They go through stresses and strains and make mistakes and so forth. But they learn rapidly, very rapidly. And this is true even in the mental health service environment, perhaps especially so.
True, especially so in the sense of students accelerating their development when they're working closely with mental health professionals.
Correct. I think that one of the things that counseling centers have to offer is that we can help that developmental process go smoother and faster for most students. It's not always true because some students face some really serious long term situations that don't change very rapidly or very quickly. But I think the majority of students do change fastly.
We had a question from a professor who couldn't be here today because he's teaching. That's a good reason.
Hmm.
This is Ed Webb at Dickinson College in Pennsylvania, and he asks, there appears to be increasing demand for mental health services for college students. Is the change in volume or number only or also in type of challenges students are experiencing?
That's a good question. There is an increasing demand that is very clear in the data, and it continues to increase. I think when I was in the center where I worked, our sessions increased on average somewhere between 10 to 15% every year, and it did so
Whoa.
for about 15 years in a row.
Wow. That's doubling in size.
Well, it was very rapid growth, and some of that is, to be honest with you, I think a lot of that is due to the success of outreach that happens now on college campuses, not just by the counseling centers, but by administrators and faculty and others. But also because young people are much more accepting, are burdened with less stigma about seeking help than was true in the past. I noticed a change in that just during my 27-year career. And there's other factors that go along with that too.
Do you? Oh, that's a really powerful answer, especially that's grounded in data. That we have this rising demand, and it's good to know that outreach on campus is increasing, and that's also really good to know that the stigma around seeking help for mental challenges is reducing. Do you find that we are if we're talking about traditional age students, 18 to 22 years old, do you see a generational shift? I mean, are these students more likely to be suffering from, say, adverse childhood experiences? Are they more likely to be suffering from either themselves or parents from opioids? I mean, it's just when students set foot on campus for the first time in the fall, are they psychologically more challenged than previous generations?
Well, I hope you can bear with me a little bit.
Please.
It's a complicated question and it's complicated answers. So one of the central points of my book is that, to boil it down, and this is oversimplifying it, but life in America in particular right now is extremely stressful. And I'm talking about psychologically stressful as well as other ways. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of exposure to violence. We're learning more about how that has an impact on a young person's mental health. Perhaps you've seen things recently in the press about how young people are experiencing active shooter drills, for example. That didn't exist when I was a young person. It just didn't happen. And so the one they've been telling us consistently, and this happened through my entire career, was that they're saying that they're stressed and overwhelmed. The problem is many people have been misinterpreting what that means by referring to them as snowflakes. They just can't cope, they can't handle life and so forth. And for some people that is true, there is truth to that. But we haven't considered that maybe they're being honest and genuine about that. And why is that? Where is it coming from? And there's all sorts of reasons in our culture why I think that's happening. And I'm not saying there's a wide agreement about all of that. A lot of people have very different opinions about that, strong opinions. I'm not necessarily saying it's settled even in the professional community. But this is my idea about what I think is going on with them. And now there's a flip side to this. The flip side is that for the most part, students learn rapidly. And I have found in my own therapy work that I did that many times they just need a different narrative about what is going on in their lives to help them integrate it, understand it, and begin to make changes.
A different story.
If all they get is, you're an entitled millennial, you're a snowflake, they're going to shut down on you rapidly, and that'll be the end of that. If that's the narrative they've been hearing.
Right.
And many of them have. That is what they've been hearing.
Yes. It's weird how repeated insults and abuse don't make people happy.
Yeah, imagine that.
It's a psychology.
It's gotten so pervasive that even the word millennial itself, for example, has begun to take on negative connotations.
Yes, I've seen that. We have a practical question that comes up as well. This is from, hang on one second. This is from Daniel Stanford, who asks, is there a limit on how many sessions a student can have with a counselor at UA? I'm curious if counselors have the time to build meaningful relationships with the students. Let me flash that back up on the screen again while you answer.
Right. Well, since I'm retired, let me just say that I can no longer speak for the counseling center. However, when I was working there, yes, we had a 15-session limit. It's called a soft limit. We could make extensions at any time and did frequently for those who needed that. However, I will also say that on average, most of the students we saw demonstrated significant change within 5 to 6 visits. So the way a lot of models work today is you think of therapy as episodic.
Right.
You come in, you get a month or two, you get what you need addressed and handled then, and then you come back at a later time. So some centers work by preserving those sessions as much as possible. And in cases where extensions are necessary, then we did that. Now, I'm not saying that it satisfied everybody, but I think we were able to accommodate somewhere around 95% of all incoming clients with that model.
Is it 15 session? Is that that soft limit? Is that for a student's lifetime experience with the campus?
No, that's per academic year.
Per academic year. Very good.
Right.
Thanks. We have another question here from wonderful long-term fan of the forum, Roxanne Riskin, who asks, how can health and wellness centers help online students? And what can libraries do better in this area? Libraries in a position to really need to step up here with information. I'll flash that on the screen again.
Interesting. Well, there's a tremendous upsurge in what's called telemental health right now.
Telemental
health.
Nice.
Also called telehealth. But where, there are digital solutions to distance services, there are some stubborn problems related to that having to do with licensure in the various states. For example, I'm licensed in the state of Alabama. I cannot serve anyone who is physically outside of the state borders. So that presents some limitations.
Sure.
But those services are growing, and I expect them to grow even further and take root. And most centers have at least some feature related to that to accommodate distant students. That's an interesting question about how libraries can help with that. That's something, honestly, I have not thought through. I would imagine if they were to take that on, there would have to be some sort of secure private space. But I'm also imagining that that's probably happening already on a student's cell phone. There are some apps, therapy apps that you can use. And you could do that up in the stacks where there's nobody and it's quiet in the library. So it's probably already taking place, but that could be formalized in some way if a library was willing to take that on.
There's been some recent research from Ithaca S&R taking a look at community college libraries and finding that you're looking at students and what services they need in order to succeed, and finding which of those services can be placed in libraries. Either libraries can physically house or otherwise provide. And some of them are various forms of assistance, everything from financial to political to mental health. Fantastic question, Roxanne. Fantastic question. We have another question that came in from email from the excellent Peter Shea. Peter asks, what aspects of contemporary college life contribute the most to stress? And what resources or combination of resources prove most effective in promoting positive mental health? So what about college is driving students into mental pain? And how can we turn that around?
Well, some people believe we are sitting on a higher education bubble right now, having to do with the value of the traditional degree and what it's producing for consumers. I think increasingly families and students are beginning to question that. And due to the competition involved about how to have a successful, meaningful career, there's lots of questions in their minds about, can this institution help me achieve those goals? So they come in, I think, with antenna sky high on that question. The sense of competition is keen, and students are looking for the golden ticket. And I mean, we all know that even in the old days, a college education was fraught with mistakes and misfires and starts and stops, and it's a zigzag pathway rather than a straight arrow from A to Z.
Nice.
But expectations are really high that it be just that it's A to Z, very clear, and that the institution is going to provide me with this. So this is part of the reason why anxiety in particular is one of the predominant symptoms that we're seeing. Okay, there's so much worry about their future. And when you combine that with a sense of loss of trust in society's institutions, and I don't just mean school, I mean churches, governments, houses of worship, so forth. There's this fear. It's a very powerful motivating factor for students. So what universities can do, first of all, is make sure that you have a ethic of a helping community across campus, not just in the health center, not just in the counseling center, but across the entire campus. That everybody be prepared to be responsive and lend a hand and help. Now, this is already happening. It's just that it's not often. Faculty members and administrators are helping students every day of the week.
Sure.
Outside of the classroom, I'm talking about. So, but I think also the messaging from the president on down is important. I was struck recently, not long ago, there was a president, and I forget where this was, but he acknowledged his own mental health struggles when he was a student. And talked about how he moved past that and what helped him, and encouraged his students to do the same thing.
Well, that's really nice modeling.
Yeah, and there are other institutions now that are picking up on this messaging of competition and trying to tone that down a little bit. I saw on Facebook, I think it was recently, a page from a university. It was a meme of sorts, and it just said, failure is learning. It's supposed to happen.
Right.
You know, it's okay. You're going to be okay, and so forth. Those messages are key.
Yeah, it can be hard to get that across in a hyper-competitive environment.
Yes, it can.
Friends, we have more questions coming in, but I want to make sure that you feel that you can join us and ask Lee questions. So again, remember to do what Daniel and Roxanne just did by pressing on the question mark button, and if your camera is ready, press the raised hand button and join us on stage. We had a question from Ed Webb again, who wanted to follow up, and he asks, are there particular demographic groups who need services not well supplied at the moment? For example, are campuses managing PTSD well for veterans and for sexual assault survivors? Great question.
Yes, it is a good question. Yes, there are populations that are of concern or at risk. You've identified two of them. There are campuses that have specific services for veterans. At the campus where I worked, there was a totally separate department who did that. Everything from health to mental health to academics and so forth. Campuses really have to beef up some of the services for at-risk or marginalized populations. The first-generation student, students who have been subject to harassment, discrimination, racism, sexual abuse, sexual assault, and so This can be a very challenging thing to do because, of course, you're talking about resources there, financial resources. It takes a lot to erect an entire different department for various populations. But and there are various ways to do this. It doesn't have to be a totally separate department for each issue, but there does have to be the funding, the decision making to put those supports in place.
Well, that sounds like another kind of, you were describing a total campus response where multiple people are participating in supporting students. So this would be a way of really fleshing that out.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, let's turn back a bit more to the question of how to support students. What do you do with faculty who often say, I would like to help my students with their mental health issues, but they face two huge problems, one of which is that they are not trained as mental health professionals, unlike yourself, and the other is that the majority of faculty in the United States are part-timers who usually don't have a lot of time outside of class. So how can we help faculty get over those two big hurdles?
Well, I do understand the pressures involved. I totally get that. However, let's remember that there was a day not long ago when CPR didn't exist.
Uh-huh.
Okay, nobody knew what CPR was.
Right.
They weren't trained and so forth.
Right.
There weren't these boxes that you have now, the, what are they called? The defibrillator boxes that you have in buildings now. That didn't exist. Well, now you may not be able to perform CPR, but you kind of know what it is, and you would know who can do this. You would know who to contact to get help. The attitude toward mental health needs to be just like that. Mental health first aid, that's actually a specific program, but I don't mean a specific program. We all need to be prepared to offer mental health first aid. Now, it is not as complicated as what it sounds like. Any layperson can learn the skills and implement them, just like any layperson can learn how to do CPR.
Sure.
So, and most counseling centers are able to train staff in this way, staff and faculty. And it's about basic helping skills. It's not too complicated. There's no expectation that everybody do a whole assessment and be able to provide clinical interventions and such as that. That's not what mental health first aid is. It's actually just a basic human response to someone who might be suffering, just as we would do for family or friends or each other. It's just like that. And I think faculty have been assigned so many responsibilities that they can, feel that it's overwhelming, that it's not part of what they're supposed to do and so forth. And I totally get that. But we're in a world right now where the total mental health burden in any community is somewhere between 40 and 60%. You can't send 40 to 60% of all enrollment to the counseling center or to the health center.
Oh, I say you mean 40 to 60% of a given population have mental health needs.
There's some sort of mental health need, yes. Now, that doesn't mean disorder.
Right.
Okay, because everybody can have a bad day, and that's a mental health need. Right? So, yeah. Everybody has to be willing to lend a hand.
Then so this would be something which faculty and other staff would have to learn through some form of training or support from campus counseling centers, I guess.
Yes, counseling centers or others. There are many individuals or departments who can provide that kind of training.
Well, that would be a big change, a very large change for quite a few people. How do you respond to the second problem of so many faculty being adjuncts and simply not having the time to be available outside of campus because they're racing off to their next gig at another institution?
Sure. Well, a lot of helping interactions are actually happening by text and email already between students. between students and faculty and others. In fact, students prefer, in many cases, a text exchange compared to others. I'm not saying that's always great, but it's very easy to do that. And now there's an entire crisis service built around texts. It's called
Right.
Crisis Text Line. Yeah, you've probably heard of that.
That's
Yeah,
a
so
good
there are, you know, you don't have to have the traditional closed door in an office, you know, where you spend an hour with someone. It's not always that way.
Oh, that helps. We have, I think that we can do just about any of us can participate in that. We have the chance to bring up Roxanne Riskin on stage, and I'm going to add her right now to our panel of conversation. Roxanne, greetings. Give her a second for the bandwidth to line up.
Thanks, Ryan, and thank you for addressing. Am I connected? Okay.
Yes, you are.
Hi, Roxanne.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for addressing such an important topic for our students in education. And I love your idea of mobile first. We are, and we need to really recognize we are in a mobile first learning environment for our students on campus, and we need to address this now, not tomorrow, not in the future. And I love I'm a new mindfulness educator, and bringing mindfulness is not hard to do. It is often free, using the Stop, Think, and Breathe learning app, which is free to all educators forever. They just announced it this month.
Wow.
That's great.
So it's at the university, it's lower ed, it's higher ed. So this is something we need to bring into counseling centers and address the medically vetted apps like Headspace by Andy Puttycombe. We have Calm.com. We have at least 5 apps right at students' fingertips where they can use. Now, it's not without controversy. Of course, some of them are subscription-based, and we need to maybe discuss that further at some time. And what are your thoughts about the mobile-first apps, and which are not HIPAA compliant? Probably not. I haven't really looked at the HIPAA compliance on some of the apps, but maybe they don't need that component at this level.
Yes. No, I'm in total agreement with you that that's the way things are going, and it needs to happen yesterday. Because this is what young people are doing. I mean, us old codgers can whine about it, but they're going to move on with that. There are some apps that are HIPAA compliant. In the center where I worked, we used Therapy Assisted Online, or TAO, T-A-O, and there was an app or a feature that you could put on your phone related to that is HIPAA compliant. So those do exist. Now, the interesting thing to me is if we don't do this, we're really missing a huge opportunity. And let me expand on that if I may.
Please.
So many of the what we call crisis situations that students have are essentially a form of panic. Okay? Now, I'm talking about panic over big issues like relationships, family, their schoolwork, a grade, something going on socially on campus, that kind of thing. And if you can get to them quickly during the panic, and an app is one way to do that, you can actually reduce the likelihood of that growing, becoming worse, and turning into a full-blown episode of some kind. I've seen that many times in my career. You get to them at the right moment, when they have the need, they have the questions, and the app can address that pretty promptly.
Nice. Well, since I have the two of you here, if I could ask, what do you think of the mindfulness paradigm? Is that something that is productive to apply to a campus community as a way of improving mental health?
Roxanne, you have an opinion?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote the app experience at Fairfield University 3 years ago, and they
Mm.
were using that in their center, and it was on one of the library guides that I promoted it on, and um, absolutely, it was well received. But again, it's new to campus wellness, health and wellness centers, and it's something that's really not investigated enough yet, and it should be embraced more by provosts and presidents. So once we have the
Mm.
higher level people accepting it and practicing it, like presidents of universities, et cetera, and faculty members, then that buy-in is there with the key stakeholders that we need to bring it to full fruition on campus.
I agree with you, Roxanne. I think it's an important development in the field, and it needs to continue and grow. Um, One of the challenges that we always had is buy-in from the student. Many of them, as soon as you started talking about deep breathing, would dismiss it if it wasn't connected to exactly what was going on in their lives. Okay, why do they need to be mindful right now?
Mm. Mm.
Okay, the
Mm.
why helps you identify more about the how. Okay, because everybody's circumstances are different. They might be anxious or stressed out or panicking because of a situation back at home, for example. Well, the way you're mindful about that kind of thing might be very different from the mindfulness that you need to undertake if you're having urges to abuse substances, for example,
Right.
and so on, and so on. So it needs to be tailored and specific to the student as much as possible. And that's hard to do with any sort of self-help, uh, strategy. It's true of books too.
Well, absolutely, but on campus and the health center is like the key, the hub, the focus area where students go for stress, anxiety, and now when we bring in libraries as the university community component, or a museum at Fairfield University, we have mindfulness at the museum. So we're having
Oh.
more acceptance and delivering our message on how important meditation doesn't have to be, oh, you have to make an appointment at the Health and Wellness Center. It can be done on your phone. It can be done on campus. It can be done online. So we have to approach it with a multi-tiered approach, just not one physical place on campus. We have online students who might need these resources and don't know where to get them. Mindful breathing is something that I began at Yale University through MBSR training, and then I just completed mindfulness at Brown University. There are courses that are University of Central Florida has courses, Duke University. These are important and impressive courses that are 5-week modules for professional learning, professional development sessions that can be embraced by faculty, presented to faculty, that can be incorporated on campus, off campus, and webinars. And just different approaches need to be really fully investigated and piloted.
I love that idea, and it fits right in with what I said earlier about developing a healing community, not just the counseling center or the health center. Fits right in with that.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Roxanne. That's a great question, great topic to bring up, and thank you, really, for these terrific answers. I'd like to hear more about mindfulness down the road, Roxanne. Don't be shy about sharing that.
I'll be there for you anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, you see, if you haven't used this before, it's really easy to climb up on stage. I just beamed Roxanne up, and she was able to join us. So we have about 13 minutes left, and I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask questions, be they about how to structure the campus support, be they the nature of students as they change, or the role of technology, or the role of other paradigms such as mindfulness. Please feel free to share. And again, use the raised hand button to join us on stage, or click the circle with a question mark if you just want to type in your comments. Let's go back to one of the earlier questions, which has to do with how campuses and how students are changing. Do you detect any differences between traditional age students and adult learners? adult learners constitute something roughly 30% of the higher education market right now. Are adult learners less likely to use technology, as you mentioned? Are they less likely to seek mental health treatment? Are their experiences different in ways that we can speak of?
Well, so I come from the perspective of an on-campus mental health service, so keep that in mind. Primarily, traditional age students use that service. We did see older students, non-traditional students. We did see them, but not in the same proportion. And that may have to do with various barriers that they face, like transportation and so on. Right. But I think centers are more and more are undertaking efforts to reach those populations, and often through what may look like non-clinical encounters or interventions.
What are some examples of those?
Yeah, for example, we had a group, and by the way, sometimes if you call something a group, people will stay away from it. They think it's group therapy. But if you call it a workshop or a class or something like that, you get much better response, especially if it's away from the counseling center. So we had some anxiety reduction groups that actually took place in the recreation center and involved components of both movement and art and music. And for cultures or populations that had more stigma about therapy or getting help, that was much more attractive to them. They're more likely to use it. And so it's about being creative and getting out of the box a little bit about what you're offering and where and when.
So it's not just necessarily the therapist office with the couch, but this can be movement therapy and called something completely different.
That's correct. When I first started my career, we just expected everybody to come to us in the four walls during 1 hour a week. And a lot of people dig that, they're okay with that, but a lot of people just doesn't fit their life or their beliefs or expectations.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. We have another question here, a follow-up from Daniel Stafford. So Daniel asks, how can we help faculty embrace the idea they can support students' mental health if they think that's a form of, quote, coddling? Can we help them see the distinction here?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it's a difficult subject. I think, first of all, we have to understand stress in America right now. I guess we're primarily talking about American universities. I realize these things don't necessarily apply everywhere. I would encourage everyone, if you haven't, to read the American Psychological Association's annual Stress in America report. And it's broken down by generations and other demographic factors. And what you're going to see is that it is steadily climbing and getting worse. And there is a difference between how young people experience stress and how older generations experience stress. But both of them, all of the generations, are reporting increased stress. Okay, it's a reality. If you are going to try to deny that, to pretend that it doesn't exist, or to find fault in the individual, you're really missing the boat. Okay? And I think what's happened for a lot of university personnel, this is not just faculty, is they're conflating what looks like immaturity or irresponsibility with panic and stress reactions. Okay? They're not the same thing. Panic is real. Stress reactions are real. Now, it might be expressed in a way that's less mature, but these are young people.
Right.
Okay? They're going to do that, especially if they're less equipped, maybe from their parenting experience, to handle stress and cope with things. But you have to meet them where they are. You can't meet them through judgment or denial. That's just not going to work. It actually will make it worse.
So this isn't a case where tough love is going to help.
Well, there's a place for upholding boundaries, upholding classroom expectations and rules. I'm not saying those things aren't real. They are. But you can be both firm and supportive at the same time. Now, when you're pressed for time, as many faculty members are, that's a challenge. I don't deny that at all. But it can be done. I'm thinking back over my career, and I remember some of the most helpful first responses came from faculty who carved out a little bit of time and had an ear that they were receptive to hear what was going on with the student. And frankly, that individual, that type of faculty member, ended up spending less time with the student and their issues than did the faculty member who came from a more judgmental or just denying the reality of mental health and stress. That faculty member ended up spending more time with the issues, one way or the other, because it would bounce back inevitably.
That's a tricky lesson learned. We have a great. That's a great answer, by the way. Thank you. We have Daniel Stanford on video. Daniel, I called you Stafford before. My apologies. Thank you for coming.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Yes. Hey, Daniel.
I sat in on several of these, and this is my first one where I was actually in a place where I could turn my camera on. So I'm really excited.
Welcome.
And I just wanted to say I was actually in undergrad back in the late 90s at University of Alabama. So Dr. King looked vaguely familiar to me.
Okay. All right, good. I've aged a little bit since then.
maybe just a few more gray hairs.
We all.
So, I'm kind of fortunate because I find myself in a position now where I get to talk to faculty a lot about inclusive teaching and creating welcoming learning environments for students, particularly underserved students who may have their own unique sources of stress or a feeling that they don't belong when they go into a certain type of course or discipline. And I find sometimes, not often, but once in a while, I meet a faculty member who has this sort of hazing ritual mindset where to them to extend some sort of kindness, like a little extra, I care about you, I want to work with you, I can see that you really want to do well on this assignment, but you're having trouble managing your time. To them, if that wasn't done for them, it feels like they must somehow pass that torment along to their students. And I don't know if you've run into this or what advice you'd have. And I also love your first aid metaphor. And I don't know if you have any resources for that or something you could recommend that we share with faculty.
Yes, well, to your last question, there is an organization called Mental Health First Aid. They can come to campus and train staff. I really recommend that the counseling center or the mental health service on your campus take the lead in developing that program. But I will also say this, it's expensive. And you can develop a local tailor-made program using the same concepts because the concepts are not difficult. These are all concepts that most psychologists and counselors are very familiar with. You just put it together in a format and where it's about mental health first aid, okay? And people can accept that and understand that easily. And now I've already lost what your first point was.
I was talking about this hazing mindset.
Yes, yeah. Okay, yes, I did run into that a lot. In fact, when I spoke earlier about helping a student develop a different narrative, one of the common ones is, I would sometimes say, academia it involves academic hazing, and it hasn't changed since the medieval period in that regard. Once they understood that, they could understand better the stresses and strains they were under and how to deal with it. So it's a reality. And I think it's a reflection, to be honest with you, of the trauma that many academicians start their careers out of. Okay, who doesn't remember that from the time they were doing their thesis or their dissertation.
Absolutely.
I certainly do. Yeah. So if you come into any group, whether it's a family, a work situation, or academia, out of trauma, you're going to perpetuate a lot of that, just like that would happen anywhere else. So some of it might involve actually reaching out to faculty. And I believe it might be best for faculty to do that with each other, because it could be, there could be a lot of defensiveness and so forth if I were to march in as a psychologist and take that on. But, I'm glad to hear about your awareness about that. I often wondered if that.
Well, I'm doing a certificate program right now for a cohort of faculty on just the fundamentals of good teaching. And it's interesting because it comes up once in a while. It kind of surprises me, but there are some folks who are very adamant that they're not here to be the students' friends. They're here to enforce these very strict kind of policies and teach them how to do things on time, instead of kind of viewing college as really what it is in my mind, which is a period to fail safely and miss deadlines and mess things up and get feedback on that, and then have somebody say, okay, now tell me how you're going to get this right next time around.
Yes. Well, it's really all about being trauma informed in your work. That's sort of a recent big push in the mental health world, is being trauma informed in your work. And based on what we know now about how many people are experiencing some form of trauma, harassment, discrimination, abuse, and so forth, if you're not trauma informed in your work, you're going to make things worse. Okay, and you're going to create a student who won't persist.
Well, Daniel, thank you very much for that really, really good question. And
Thank you.
I'm sorry to hear a faculty who believes so strongly in hazing.
There's a small number.
No, it's okay. I think I know some of them. Thank you again. Lee, I hate to wrap things up, but we're at the very end of the hour. And you've given us a kind of masterclass in how to improve mental health support on a college campus, which I thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
So if anyone wants to know more about you, I want to point them to your new book, Delivering Effective College Mental Health Services, which you can buy through our bookstore. You are on Twitter, and when you rejoin Twitter after this conversation, you will find a whole bunch of tweets. Mostly people responding to what you're saying or summarizing it. Is there any, are those the best two ways to follow up with you and your work?
Yes, there's also a Facebook page that I run. It's called College Mental Health. Yeah, people can find me there. I'm the administrator of that page. And basically on Twitter and the Facebook page, I'm pushing out the same sorts of messaging that we've talked about here today.
Excellent. Well, please. So we have the Facebook page, there's the Twitter account, and the new book, which is the book on the subject. Once again, thank you so much, Lee. This has been really, really helpful. And I'm really impressed at how you point out a very positive way forward for our students.
Well, thank you. Thanks again for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. But don't leave, everybody, because we still have to tell you about what's happening next week and along the way. So let me just bring these up. Next week, we'll be joined by Professor David Staley from Ohio State. David's the author of a new book on what he calls alternative universities. And so this is a whole stack of possible creative ways that higher education could change shape. It's a very exciting, inspirational book, and I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Meanwhile, speaking of books, we're continuing our reading of The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. We're pushing into the last part of the book now. The book is enormously powerful. It's shaping policy, law, all kinds of discussions around the world. So please join us for that. If you'd like to grab either Lee's book or Surveillance Capitalism, head to our bookstore, which is the only curated bookstore about the future of education anywhere. And if you want to keep all of our conversations going, if you want to start talking more about mental health, mindfulness, and how generations change, head to our various discussion sites. Hit me up on Twitter, go to our groups on Slack or Facebook or LinkedIn, and just comment us. We'd be glad to keep the conversation going. In the meantime, thank you so much for your attention. This has been a very powerful conversation. I'm really grateful to everyone for your questions and comments. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.